What's happening? I don't know what's happening. We're losing control of the aircraft. We've lost all control.
What you're hearing is the beginning of one of aviation's greatest mysteries. A state-of-the-art aircraft, an experienced crew, and a sudden terrifying plunge into the unknown. This is the story of Air France Flight 447. On May 31st, 2009, at around 8 p.m. local time, Air France Flight 447 pushed back from the gate at Rio de Janeiro International Airport in Brazil, bound for Paris, France. The 12-hour journey would take it across the Atlantic Ocean, from Brazil's coastline, over the open ocean and towards the European mainland. The aircraft was an Airbus A330-200, one of the most advanced in Air France's fleet. It had undergone a major overhaul just a month earlier, in April 2009, and had logged about 19,000 flight hours. It was powered by two General Electric CF6 engines, with no recorded issues at the time of departure. Now let's talk about the crew and the flight path. On board were 216 passengers of nearly 30 nationalities, primarily French, Brazilian and German travelers, a mix of business and vacation passengers. Due to the long-haul nature of the flight, which exceeded the 10-hour duty limit before a break was required, the flight was crewed by 3 pilots. Captain Marc Dubois, 58, with nearly 11,000 flying hours, including 1,700 on the Airbus A330. Relief First Officer David Robert, 37, with over 6,000 hours, mostly on the A330, and First Officer Pierre Cedric Bonan, 32, with nearly 3,000 flight hours, though only 87 on this aircraft type. At 8:30 p.m., the Airbus took off without issue, following standard procedures for climb and cruise. At 20,000 feet, the Relief First Officer left the cockpit to begin his scheduled rest period, leaving the captain in command. The flight climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, and for the first few hours, everything was uneventful. By 1:35 a.m., Flight 447 entered Atlantic Oceanic airspace northeast of South America. This region is part of the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a known hotspot for unpredictable and powerful thunderstorms. These storms can be difficult to detect on radar, especially at night, making navigation through them particularly challenging. The flight crew monitored the weather ahead and discussed climbing to 37,000 feet to avoid turbulence. However, warm air at high altitude made climbing impractical. The captain, preparing for his rest break, left the cockpit without a full briefing, leaving the 2 co-pilots in charge. The aircraft soon encountered moderate turbulence. The pilots adjusted their course 12 degrees to the left to avoid the worst of the weather. The flight crew monitored the weather ahead and discussed climbing to 37,000 feet to avoid turbulence. However, warm air at high altitude made climbing impractical. The captain, preparing for his rest break, left the cockpit without a full briefing, leaving the 2 co-pilots in charge. The aircraft soon encountered moderate turbulence. The pilots adjusted their course 12 degrees to the left to avoid the worst of the weather. At 2:10 a.m., the situation took a dramatic turn. Ice crystals began striking the aircraft, clogging the pitot tubes which measure airspeed. Though normally heated to prevent icing, the extreme ice buildup outpaced the heaters. As a result, the airspeed readings became unreliable, dropping sharply from 275 to 139 knots. This triggered a chain reaction of system failures. The autopilot disengaged, the flight bars disappeared, and the flight control mode shifted from normal to alternate law, disabling several built-in protections. The first officer, now manually flying, pulled the nose up, causing the aircraft to climb rapidly. The stall warning sounded. A stall occurs when an aircraft's wings lose the ability to generate lift, causing it to fall uncontrollably. Despite this, the first officer continued pulling back on the stick, worsening the situation. The aircraft's pitch angle increased to 16 degrees, and its rate of climb reached an alarming 6,000 feet per minute. Amid the confusion, the relief first officer tried calling the captain back to the cockpit. Meanwhile, the aircraft, now at nearly 38,000 feet, began rolling uncontrollably. The first officer struggled to stabilize it, making large control inputs that only worsened the oscillations. The stall warning continued, but the crew did not recognize the stall for what it was. 2 minutes after the crisis began, the captain returned to the cockpit, but by then the aircraft was in freefall. The vertical descent rate had reached 10,000 feet per minute. The airspeed indicators temporarily failed, making it even harder for the pilots to understand their situation. The first officer, still holding the stick back, kept the aircraft's nose high, worsening the stall. At 9,000 feet, the relief first officer finally realized the need to push the nose down, but the first officer continued pulling back, causing the aircraft to remain in a stalled state. The captain, struggling to make sense of the situation, attempted to reset the flight computers, but it had no effect. As the aircraft dropped through 4,000 feet, the ground proximity warning system sounded, "Pull up! Pull up!" Both pilots applied full thrust and nose-up input, but it was too late. The Airbus A330 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean at 2:14 a.m., killing all 228 passengers and crew aboard. The aircraft had fallen 38,000 feet in just 3.5 minutes. Shortly after 4 a.m., when Flight 447 failed to check in with air traffic control, a search effort was launched. However, the aircraft had disappeared in a remote area of the ocean with no radar coverage. 2 days later, search teams spotted floating debris and an oil slick. Over the following days, bodies and wreckage were recovered, but it wasn't until April 2011, nearly 2 years later, that the final resting place of Flight 447 was located 4,000 meters below the ocean's surface. The black boxes were retrieved in May 2011, providing crucial insights into the disaster. Shortly after 4 a.m., when Flight 447 failed to check in with air traffic control, a search effort was launched. However, the aircraft had disappeared in a remote area of the ocean with no radar coverage. 2 days later, search teams spotted floating debris and an oil slick. Over the following days, bodies and wreckage were recovered, but it wasn't until April 2011, nearly 2 years later, that the final resting place of Flight 447 was located 4,000 meters below the ocean's surface. The black boxes were retrieved in May 2011, providing crucial insights into the disaster. The final investigation report, published in July 2012 by France's Air Safety Agency, BEA, identified several key factors. The pitot tubes became blocked by ice crystals, leading to temporary loss of airspeed data. The autopilot disengaged, requiring manual control. The first officer responded inappropriately, pulling the nose up instead of pushing it down. The aircraft entered a sustained stall and the crew failed to recognize or correct it. A lack of specific high-altitude stall recovery training contributed to the crew's confusion and ineffective responses. In response to the findings, BEA issued several recommendations: improved pilot training with mandatory exercises on manual aircraft handling and stall recovery at high altitude, enhanced flight data recorders, including image recording of cockpit instruments, improvements to pitot tube designs to reduce icing risk. The tragedy of Flight 447 highlights the crucial role of pilot training and situational awareness in modern aviation. It serves as a stark reminder that even the most advanced aircraft rely on the ability of their pilots to correctly interpret and respond to emergencies. By learning from these events, the aviation industry continues to evolve, striving for safer skies for all.